Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Multimedia Storytelling, breaking through the noise without breaking your budget. We're going to take just a few minutes before we get the webinar officially started to please direct your attention to our first slide. Whenever you arrive, please go ahead and type in what it is you do and indicate where you are with storytelling in your organization using the following options as a guide. 1. Thinking about creating a video for your organization or audience? If so, what kind? 2. Dabbled with production, maybe created a couple of videos already and looking to grow a program. 3. Storyteller looking for new perspectives. 4. Interested mostly in technology, what kind? 5. Others. So please go ahead, think about those questions, type your answers into the chat box, and we'll get started in just a few more minutes. Well, good morning or almost afternoon, depending on what time zone you're in. My name is Lessa Pelayo Lozada, and I'm president of the Asian Pacific American Librarians Association. I'd like to welcome you to our webinar, Multimedia Storytelling, Breaking Through the Noise Without Breaking Your Budget, featuring Brian Leaf. For those of you who are not Apollo members and wondering what Apollo might be, Apollo is a professional library organization dedicated to cultivating Asian Pacific American leadership through mentorship and professional engagement, advancing social justice, and providing opportunities for dialogue and networking to promote the needs of APA professionals and those who serve APA communities. Apollo is an affiliate of the American Library Association and maintains a separate membership base, which basically means you don't have to be an ALA member to be an Apollo member. For more information about Apollo and to become a member, please visit our website at www.apolloweb.org. I'd now like to introduce our speaker, Brian Leaf. Brian Leaf is the Emerging Technologies Coordinator for the National Network of Libraries of Medicine, South Central Region. He received his MSLS from UNC Chapel Hill and worked as the Instructional Design Librarian at The Ohio State University for several years. In that position, he helped lead the digital storytelling program, expanding its reach with on and off-campus partners. In his current role, he does marketing, outreach, and education to a 5-state region. His interests lie in developing solutions around health information to enhance the well-being of underserved communities. He has presented at a variety of venues on information literacy and digital storytelling, and out of those efforts co-wrote a chapter in the forthcoming International Handbook of Digital Storytelling. In 2013, he was directly involved in the design and implementation of a survey as part of ALA President Molly Raphael's initiative, Building Bridges to Mentoring. Brian is a proud alumnus of both the ALA Spectrum Scholarship Program and the ARL Career Enhancement Program. Brian is also the incoming Apollo Vice President, President-elect. I now turn it over to Brian.
Hi, everybody. Thank you for coming and thank you for having me here today. So I'm going to be talking about multimedia storytelling. This was a bit of a challenge. As Lessa mentioned, I am in a new position with the National Network of Libraries of Medicine. So it's been a few months since I've touched this topic. So the challenge of, this being not the freshest topic on my mind, and at the same time, I've tried to do my best to condense what's usually a 3-day workshop into just an hour. I'm not going to try to cram this presentation full of information. I'd rather just leave room for questions. Usually, once you start talking about this topic a little bit, people think of specific questions, and I want to be able to address those. The digital storytelling program at OSU, what it really was, it was an interdisciplinary team of facilitators. And what we would do is we'd run 3-day workshops throughout the year. These were immersive workshops, 8 hours a day. Each workshop had a small group of people. We took up to 12 people. Sometimes this was just 4 or 5 people. Sometimes we'd overload a little bit with 12 or 13 people. And usually we'd have up to 3 facilitators. We kind of took that down to 2 facilitators as time went on. And we taught immersive storytelling in a community, I see I have a typo here, in a community of practice. We really wanted people to get to know each other in an intimate setting. And and what we would have every participant do is complete a 3 to 5 minute story. These stories were sort of very specific, on the surface. It was comprised of first person narration, mostly still photography. And if you've ever seen Ken Burns' documentary like the Civil War, they were really stylized, after those films. And I'll talk a little bit more later about why we did that. Our audience was pretty much everyone on campus, faculty and staff. We had a workshop for them at least a couple times a year. Um, and then, oh, that's funny. I think that second one should say students, not staff. So we worked with students 3 times a year. And then we also had special clients. We'd go to another university to give some of our workshops, local high schools. I did work for a local nonprofit and helped them produce a film. And then, on campus, it also led to opportunities like working with the MBA program, and then also working with the exhibits program on campus, where I started to do work, creating audio tours, and then here and there have brief documentaries where we would feature projects that were happening on campus. So there's a wide range of work that we did with multimedia storytelling. So what's going to happen for during this hour is I'm going to describe 3 elements in storytelling. I put in parentheses here, or imparting knowledge in anecdotal form, because what I sort of realized as an instructional designer / instructional consultant, as well as a storytelling facilitator, is that the language was different, but a lot of what I was talking about, the concepts that we were talking about, really paralleled each other. The things that make for an engaging lecture are the same things that make for an engaging story. So the majority of the presentation will be on that. We'll also talk about talk a little bit about the production process and sort of tips I have there, software and equipment I use, as well as what I look for, and then I have just some final thoughts on what I think it means to have a multimedia storytelling program. And we'll leave time for questions and comments. But if you have any questions or comments throughout this presentation, please go ahead and just throw them into the chat box. Okay. So we all tell stories to some extent. When I talk about teaching people a framework, we're not reinventing the wheel. But what this framework does in a community of practice, it gives us a common language. It gives us a common language to work from, and it starts giving us concepts that maybe we already knew inherently about stories. I mean, we all watch movies and read books, so we have some idea of what goes on in stories. But when you start to create your own stories, it helps to be able to have a common lexicon. So I'm going to just talk about a few of the core elements of storytelling. There are usually several more that we include, but again, this can't be too exhaustive. So I tried to pick out what I thought were sort of the most crucial if I had to rank all of these elements. So the first concept, or the first element of storytelling, is point of view. And this really encapsulates 2 different ideas. The first is that your story has a point. There's a moral to the story. If you look at fables like the tortoise and the hare, the lesson learned is that slow and steady wins the race. And every story has some sort of lesson that's embedded into it like that. But there's also sort of a secondary definition to point of view, which is that you're telling a story from a certain perspective, or a story is being told from a certain perspective, even if it's not yours. It's hard to tell stories or convey information neutrally, without some sort of bias sneaking in. And when you're trying to tell a very, very engaging story, it helps to have some sort of perspective. Uh, One of the rules that Pixar has about storytelling is that passive is poison. And we'll probably revisit this idea a couple more times before the presentation is over. All right, so what you all need to do now, or what I have here is, I have a few video examples, and Les has gone ahead and thrown the link in there. It's less than a minute, so go ahead, click on the link. I'll turn off, I'll mute. Okay, in the interest of time, I'm just gonna go ahead and keep moving. It looks like we might have someone who's still watching the video. So this is kind of a funny video to show because, we all kind of know what he was on now. But when this came out back in 2001, and I was just starting to do a lot of cycling, it was a really inspirational video. But the point here is not to criticize Lance Armstrong, but this is one of my favorite videos for just demonstrating, just demonstrating this idea of point of view. There's a clear goal he has in doing this video. He's very confident. He's on the defensive. He wants to show. The point of the video is that he's not on drugs. He's just a really, really hard worker, and that's what makes him a great American, or whatever message that you want to take away from that. Okay, so point of view is the first element. The second one is dramatic question. This is probably what I think is one of the most important ones as well. A dramatic question. It's the thing that dramatic question or conflict. It's the thing that drives the story. So in Apollo 13, the driving question is, will they survive? It's in Toy Story, it's whether or not they're going to get back to Andy. In Titanic, we want to know if Jack and Rose are going to make it in the end. I have the S in parentheses though, because it's never just one dramatic question. Just like in a research paper, with the research question, there are questions that drive along the story the entire time. Whether it has to do with whether it has to do with the people involved. Like the individual characters played by Tom Hanks or Kevin Bacon in Apollo 13. In Toy Story, we have Woody and Buzz, or I think both of them are trying to make it out of Sid's house somehow. How will they do that? What will they do? And then in Titanic, there are even questions that aren't answered, like couldn't have Jack fit on that giant door frame along with Rose? And with these questions, I think, as I've thought more and reflected about, what it means to have a dramatic question, it's really the thing that pulls the viewer along. So we're going to go ahead, and on this next slide, we're going to we're going to take a look at another video, and this was a video that was completed in a digital storytelling workshop. If it was last year or 2 years, they all kind of blend in together. I think this one's just over 3 minutes, so we're going to go ahead and watch this and check back in 3 minutes, and go ahead whenever you're finished. Just type that into the chat box like Lessa had you do before. Okay, looks like everyone is mostly finished. So before I go on, I just want to give credit where credit is due. So the digital storytelling program at OSU um, was founded with the blessing of what used to be called the Center for Digital Storytelling. That's an international organization that was founded in San Francisco nearly I think about 25 years ago now. And their model is what we based our program on, and sort of the things I'm showing you today and teaching you about today is kind of a hybrid of the experiences that I've had with the program, um, as well as the works I did beyond the program, as well as with their model. So with these first two elements that we've talked about in terms of storytelling, those really come you know are maybe enhanced versions of what they did. Okay, so that story was just a little over 3 minutes. For the most part, there's some production value in that. So you can imagine what these 3 days are like in our workshop. They can get pretty hectic. To come up with a script, get feedback on it, and do all the recording and gathering all the assets. I'll talk about that a little bit more. But what I really like about this story is that again, it exemplifies what we mean by dramatic questions. Um, it's not just giving you a set of facts. She uses language in her script that presents more questions as time goes on. So just from the opening line, we are going to get a new house. In the past progressive tense, that word tells you something. Um, then it might be confirmed in later on when she says, "Mommy cautioned me that this new house might not be our special house." Well, I just wasn't hearing that. Now, to hear something in the past progressive tense twice, that either confirms a foreshadowing for me or it's misdirection. And then, I don't think I need to read these next lines, but you sort of get the point. A woman nervously peeks through. Who is that woman? Is she squatting in the house, or is she a serial killer? We don't know. Probably not a serial killer. It didn't have that tone to it, but um, so this sort of technique, when you ask lots and lots of questions, I kind of like to call that the what's behind that corner approach. It's what they use in the show 24. If you ever watched that, you can really go overboard with dramatic questions, or with questions in general, like they did in Lost, where they just kept piling on the questions to the point where it became unrealistic to try to answer all of them. Okay, so this next element, and it's going to be the last one I talk about, sort of combines, the things that I've learned doing these workshops, and as well as a couple of the elements that we used to originally teach. And I'm calling it authentic voice and universal experiences. So in our workshops, we always required people to tell stories in the first person. Um, and, you know, people always ask us why we do that. And that's because we feel like, at least in our framework, we feel like unless you're able to tell your own stories, how are you going to tell everyone? How are you going to tell everyone else's story? And I think that gets back to, or anyone else's story rather. And I think that gets back to trying to create a community of practice. I mean, that story that we saw in A House Is Not a Home is a fairly personal story, and unless you feel comfortable in a small group, you're not going to necessarily tell that story first in a group of strangers. So I have this picture of a voicemail because it seems like a universal truth that nobody likes their voice. Um, Actually, a really rewarding experience for me as we go through these workshops. I was working with a group of students, and at the end, one of the students came up to me and said, "Brian, yeah, I really haven't liked my voice, and I really hated that. we had to record our voices. But after doing this workshop, I really like my voice. In fact, I think everyone should hear my voice. Um, and I thought he was joking at first, but he wasn't. There was no irony to what he was saying. He's like, no, I'm serious. I really like it. I think more people should hear it. So I'm not sure if that means mission was accomplished during that workshop, but it. I'm glad he started to feel comfortable with that. Um, but going back to authentic voice and universal experiences, and this could be a corollary of traumatic questions. But something that we also used to say in our workshop when we would talk about traumatic questions, we'd have this phrase: "My story is about blank, but it's really about blank," and that's because what we find makes stories really powerful isn't just that it's multi-layered or that it's asking a million questions that to drive forward the narrative. It's that it's that there's a layer there's a layer that touches on some sort of universal human experience. It doesn't even have to be. It doesn't even have to be. The most nuanced, most sophisticated screenplay in the world. Even in a Marvel movie, which is just action packed, it touches on this desire, to see good triumph over evil, for people to come together in friendship and overcome some obstacle. Stories make us feel things, and that's something that's something that I think is easy to forget as you're building a story, especially if you're doing it for an organization or doing it for instructional purposes. Even though we know cognitive science tells us that knowledge sticks a little better, if one, we can make it meaningful in our own lives, which is why in part we have people tell stories in the first person, and two, if you can attach some sort of emotion to it, we remember things that make us feel things. Okay, so that's those are just some of the few elements I think are really crucial. I'm going to talk a little bit. We're going to move on to the second part of this talk, which is on producing a story. So again, I don't want to spend too much time on this. It looks like all of you are in an exploratory phase of storytelling. I do have lots of thoughts on what it takes to produce a story. I am going to say I have this slide that I included here. 1 minute of footage, even if you're just collecting still images, can equal at least 1 to 2 hours of post-production. Having a video program is a lot of work, especially if you're trying to make professional looking videos. I mean, I think we get our participants about 90% of the way with having a complete package. But even the movie we just saw, A House Is Not a Home, the credits were scrolling a little fast. And stylistically, some of the fonts weren't all that consistent. Video production is a very tedious task. So sometimes, when people ask me for advice on this, I'll say, well, if you're going to create just one video a year, I would really contract that work out, unless you have like a dedicated position, or you're not, or you're doing very small scale productions. I wouldn't invest too much in the video production program, or I would find a formula to stick to, and just do that over and over again, and be really good at creating one type of video. So the production process in general, this is what it looks like. If you look up production process, you'll find something that looks like this. I highlighted a few of the items that I think are really important when you're trying to create any sort of production, or especially important. So I have feedback in all three boxes. That's really important. I have table reads, which I guess is just a part of feedback. You want to read your script aloud. You want to make sure that as you're reading it, nobody's falling asleep. Um, if you're doing it for an organization, it's really helpful to talk with legal consultants. Talk with the marketing people, because usually they have some sort of branding guideline. Marketing, especially for universities, they like to vet everything. And then if you want to do more with the video, it's always good to talk with your campus or organizational HR, or if you guys have lawyers, use those, uh, because there are lots of rules with organizations about what you own versus what the organization owns and what you can do with all of those things. Um, Feedback under production in this mail production box. I say use elements. We used to do very open-ended feedback with people, but we found that people really didn't know, especially students really didn't know how to give feedback. So I put use elements here because as you're watching a movie, or you're hearing a script being read, or you're looking at the storyboard, you should be able to point out what are the dramatic questions in this story. What's the point and what's the point of view? And does it touch on some universal human experience? Does it sound like an authentic voice to you, or does it sound like a used car salesman? No offense to anybody who used to be a used car salesman out there. And then I have, just a couple things: high-res photos, sound mixing, marks of really professional things as they've paid attention to those. There are no blurry pictures. The sound it doesn't sound like you've been recording in the bathroom. And then I like to put captioning here. Lots of organizations, especially if you're with a public university, requires accessibility. So thinking about captioning is important. Making sure you keep that script that you had in pre-production is handy for doing that. And then I have publicize. Once you've done all that, make sure you publicize it. It's a shame to have done all that work without sharing it at all. Again, just a few, just to reiterate that point about, kind of paying attention to the little things, having high-res photos, having high-fidelity audio. Really the devil is in the details. Video production can be, especially post-production, can be a very tedious process. It requires a bit of perfectionism in order to really come out with a really great product. Even the titles and end credits, I have that as the last bullet points because people sometimes let those go, and lots of our participants have this great story that they've told, and then their fonts are all crazy and in different colors, and their title credits, and the text wraps wrong, and it just doesn't, it keeps it from, it makes for a good video, but not a great video. Also, you'll notice that I've linked a lot of things. For all the slides that have YouTube videos, they're all linked. At the end, I'm gonna give you the link to my presentation. I do that with all my presentations. They all live as Google Drive folders forever for anyone who attends these things. Let's see what else. Usually, I give this whole spiel on copyright. I have that handout here. I also usually have this whole spiel on visual literacy. I like to, I really go deep into that because it's important to have meaningful images or meaningful footage. Otherwise, you just kind of have a glorified PowerPoint. And then, I just also want to illustrate, and this is going to be no surprise to people that work in libraries, but when students do this, and even sometimes faculty, when they look for images online, they're not finding the best resolution image. They do a Google search. They're not really paying attention to copyright, which also gets some of them into trouble because when you publish these online, sometimes YouTube takes them down. But they just look at thumbnails and they download the thumbnail based on. It's kind of showing in the next slide. Just to make this a little interactive. Just eyeballing these two pictures, which one would you say is higher resolution, the top one or the bottom one? Just your immediate reaction, not what you think is correct. Okay, so if I were you, well, actually, I'm not gonna say what I think, but I'm gonna go ahead and show you the top picture now. So this is the top one, and now, actually, we kind of had an issue with the PowerPoint, which is why I'm scrolling through a PDF right now. But you can see the difference between the top one and the bottom one. In the original slide, I think the top one, the colors looked a little bit more vibrant. So if I was moving through quickly, I might have just downloaded that one. But it was actually the bottom one that had finer lines. And, high resolution is really important because sometimes these stories get shown. I know some of these stories have been submitted to film festivals, and when they're showing it on the big screen, you especially need to make sure that you have good visuals, uh, um, and that your audio is balanced. Um, but what I also like about high resolution photos is, especially with the picture, this is an example that I used when I was working with the medieval history course. There's a lot going on in this picture, and if you're trying to tell a better story or trying to piece out what the narratives are, it's great to be able to, crop the photo further and zoom in and really see more of the details. This close, you can start to see it gets a little pixelated, but you can still make out, kind of the faces on those skulls and the action that's happening. Whereas with you know, as you might imagine, with the other one, and this image just kind of makes my eyes hurt just to look at it. You really can't make out any of the fine details whatsoever. Okay. And the last thing I'm going to say about production, well, I'm going to say a couple things about production is, I've kind of printed this story about this excerpt of a story about Toy Story 2. When it sucks, say so. Uh, at the end of the day, what lots of people do, especially when they're trying out new things, you've spent a lot of time on it, maybe, 40 to 60 hours. We've definitely spent 80 hours on the project in my department. And, uh, and despite all the work and post production we put into it, it just was not a great video. It was a great learning experience. But, you know, yeah, that's why I always say get feedback. It's going to make your story better throughout the process. But sometimes in the end, you're just not going to win. And if you're trying to push forward a certain brand strategy with your organization, you want to put out good work. You don't just want to put out work because you spent a lot of time on it. It wasn't lost time. You learned a lot of lessons while you're doing it. So when it sucks, say so, and then don't use it, which is my addition. And on that note, I don't want to end on a negative note. There's a video by Ira Glass that you can look up. He has a little spiel on creativity, and I really like it. I find it really inspirational. He says that we all have good taste. It just takes some work before we actually start producing, good work. So, you know, I've talked about the storytelling workshops that we have. I always make sure I emphasize that this is your first story that you create, the personal story that you create. That's a start. Um, but what people really should be doing is, now that they have this framework, start the next time you watch a video or read a book, you start seeing these things that we've talked about over and over and again. I can't tell you how many times I've given the workshop, and later, someone will watch the Super Bowl and say, "Oh, that Super Bowl commercial is digital storytelling," or this book I read, it has dramatic question. Well, yeah, storytelling. We have a certain language for it, but ultimately, the core concepts of storytelling hold true over a lot of different mediums. Okay, technology. Again, I'm going to kind of gloss over this. Technology changes all the time. What I was using 6 months ago isn't necessarily what I'm using today, but technology is amazing. We live in like the best world right now in terms of trying to do or start media production in our organizations or for ourselves, because anyone can create anything. And so I just have one last video to show. It's just a little over a minute, and I think the link will be typed into the chat box. So let's just check back in 2 minutes. Okay, so oh, I never turned off my mic. Okay, so as you can see, you can just do great things with just your iPhone and a few apps. So I think that gets a little bit through without breaking your budget, you can do some pretty cool things. But when I'm generally trying to create something, create any type of production, like an interview, like a single interview with someone, I kind of come from, the school of thought that you really shouldn't have to pay for too many things these days because there's a lot of great open source software. This is what I use. This is what I find works. Audacity um, for audio recording. I wouldn't use that for music, by the way. We can have a talk about like Pro Tools offline or other like music software if you want. You need a lame encoder for Audacity that just lets you export things to MP3. I use GIMP to do more complex photo editing, although oftentimes I'll just use Paint or whatever free Paint software there is on the PC or Mac to crop photos. Um, I use Premiere Pro now. It's just a $20 a month Creative Suite subscription. I mean, if you're creating small videos every now and then, or even if you have a big production, that's pretty reasonable to just pay $20 a month just for use of that software. It's very powerful. I really, it's really become my standard. But when I'm trying to like silly holiday videos, which I do as well, I'll just use iMovie for iOS. on my iPhone or iPad. It gets the job done. It has a lot of the features of iMovie for the desktop version of um, on the Mac, except the Mac version I actually don't use anymore whatsoever because it gets worse every update. Every update, they like remove features every couple of years, so it's not even a tool that I use in workshops anymore. In part because I'm not doing workshops these days, but I wouldn't use it even if I were. And then I use VLC, that's a free media player for playing and re-encoding files. I definitely don't. I would recommend not using Windows Movie Maker. Um, Even the interface doesn't really follow the industry standard for what you think interfaces should be. Um, and it's really limited in terrible ways. The export features kind of suck. Pinnacle is also terrible. That's supposed to be like the new alternative standard in movie making, but the interface is terrible and the previews are slow. And that kind of speaks to what I look for in movie editing software. Some of the essentials. I want easy to preview movies. I want to add multiple channels of audio. Uh, I want to be able to fade audio in and out. These are all these essentials are just things that this is my toolkit when I'm making a movie. When I want, like 95% complete control over what I'm doing with the movie, I definitely need these essentials, and they're not things that people think about all the time. So I see a question here. When you use iMovie, did you always record the video and sound with your phone? Yeah, mostly. If I wanted to take better audio, which sometimes I do, I have hardware listed here on the next screen. So I have my iPhone, which is actually an expensive piece of equipment. So it should be able to do something, right? Um, but when I try to record audio, it's hard not to have good audio for me. And I find these are inexpensive, but do professional quality sound if you can find a quiet space. So Blue Yeti is what I currently have. I used to have a Meteor mic. Those both work well. In fact, they've worked better than Whisper rooms. Those $5,000 Whisper rooms that have the full setup and microphones. The sensitivity of those microphones are almost a hindrance because it's picking up every little sound. Um, so I found when I was doing interviews and recording people, like Blue Yeti sounded as good as any podcast out there. There are lots of solutions for iPhones in terms of mics too. There's quite a number of companies that make microphones that you can specifically hook up to your iPhone. I can provide a list for that if you email me later. Desk lamp with a swivel head. Lighting is really important when you're taking video, and I found that a desk lamp is can be a good substitute. And then, as I mentioned, having a quiet room to record audio is really helpful. When you get into recording footage, then you have to have a lot more factors involved: the lighting, the sound environment, the nervousness that people get. When they're recording in front of a camera versus a microphone. Actually, in an earlier slide, the doubles and the detail slide, I actually have included some of these links. I included a guide to facilitating, and this is sort of the best practices that our program came up with to get someone, getting people recording up to a 5-minute video, get the audio completely cleaned up within 20 minutes or so. So be sure to check that slide out when we put in the link to the slides later. And then here's sort of the premium quality stuff. So when we started doing higher end video productions, we still weren't going to go all out, buy the $2,000 like camcorder that you see like news teams use. But with a small budget, if you do have a small budget or grant money will usually pay for this too. These are sort of the entry level things. They're still going to get you really really great quality, really great quality videos with room to grow too. I have a wired lavalier here. I mean, lots of these things you can look up. If you're looking for reviews on equipment, I recommend. I think it's wirecutter.com and not wirecutter.org. They have reviews of lots of equipment too, not just video stuff, but lots of other equipment too. So that's a great recommendation that I got from a professional photographer friend of mine. Um, but I think at least this premium list, it doesn't include a tripod, uh, but you're looking at least $1,000 to $1,500 for all of this. But if you're just looking to play around, you can still, I want to say that you can still create really really great, fantastic videos without doing the premium option. Um, and I think that's actually a good transition into sort of my final note. This is you may or may not be familiar with her. This is Brene Brown. She's a researcher and professor. Actually, I think she's at the University of Houston. She's at the College of Social Work. She had like the top, like the number one TED Talk in 2010 or 2011 or something like that. And she's been really influential on how I think about storytelling. She does a lot of research on shame and vulnerability and the risks that we take to do things, and it resonates with me a lot, as someone who was in the business of creating things, because creativity to me is risk taking, and we don't often think about that when we're creating work projects or when we're doing a work project, but I think it's a really important thing to keep in mind. It goes back to the point of don't put something out there that sucks. And when you're telling a story, I'm just going to go ahead and move to the next slide. We talked about how we're trying to touch on the universal human experience. Like a good story that you put out there is a story that makes people that a good story is a story that makes people feel things. And so, as a storyteller, I think telling stories is about trying to create empathy. And if you can take care of those details, the technology doesn't matter as much. I'd rather low quality production that tells a really really great story than a high quality production that makes me feel nothing at all. Okay, and that's all I have. So thank you. Does anyone have? We might have a couple minutes for questions. The full slides are available right here. And if you have any other thoughts or questions, feel free to email me at bbleaf@gmail.com. I'm happy to answer questions. Or I do Misgiving workshops. So if you have if you want to do like a team building thing, or just interested in exploring storytelling as a group, as a department, I'm happy to work out what that would look like, and I will undercut the story center. No, I shouldn't say that out loud. I'm actually good friends with several of them, but I'd be happy to give a talk or give a full workshop to help you produce stories if you want.
So it looks like Ariana has a question, Brian. Were your workshops geared towards any particular department and or planned collaboratively with faculty?
Yeah, we definitely, we worked with some education faculty to put together, to help students put together stories about particular experiences. So we worked with the second year transformational experience program at OSU, because because they had a reporting requirement after they did their year abroad, and so digital storytelling became a reporting requirement for them. So that was a really great experience. Really engaged students there, and we talked about doing it with other groups too. But then I left the university. I guess I also did it with the business school too, because they wanted, they were trying to do more things with getting people to improve their elevator speeches once they got onto the job market. I've also worked with, on that note, I've also worked with special collections too. We started the class in the Medical Heritage Center where students would, this was a 4 credit class, and people would tell stories about specific artifacts in special collections. And that was just a great way to expose people to a special collection that had never been looked at before by anyone other than visiting scholars. So I think there are a lot of opportunities to work with faculty on digital storytelling as class assignments to replace purely written assignments.
Looks like we've got some resource sharing going on, which is great. I'm also going to put in a link to our evaluation for this webinar. If there's no other questions, please continue to keep sharing the links in the chat box. But I would just like to say thank you to Brian for such a great webinar, and thank you to all of you for attending. Please don't forget to fill out the evaluation. We hope that you can make sorry. Thank you, Brian, and we hope you all have a great day.
Yeah, thank you, everybody. I have lots of other materials too that I've used for assignments or used in workshops. So feel free to shoot me an email. I just have this giant Google Drive folder full of things I've collected over the years. And thank you for sharing that link. I had not seen that before, but it's definitely relevant.
Okay, have a great day, everyone.